My Master's Sandals, Chapter 15. Haiti is a country that has a history of extreme poverty and political instability. In 1804, it managed to become an independent from France through a slave rebellion. There were many decades with brutal governments, having Francois Papa Doc Duvalier, a president who succeeded by his son Jean-Claude, a nickname Baby Doc. In 1990, Jean Bernard Estrade became the first Democratic president. However, a year later, he was overthrown by the military coup in what ended in a bloodbath. In 1994, René Préval was elected president, succeeding Estrade, the later being re-elected in November of 2000. In the study by the United Nations, it was concluded that 7 out of 10 Haitian inhabitants lived in poverty, more than 70% or less than $2 a day, while 56% lived on less than $1 a day. A high degree of its population, approximately 52.9%, is illiterate. Only 3 out of 10 people have access to the health system. Impoverished Black majority produce social inequality. Haitians' primary language was Creole. The others who were French-speaking up to only 1% of the country and owned most of the wealth. This created a divided society. The Haitians' economy was much better than that of the Dominican Republic. Still, my interest in earning a living in some other way led me to take the risk, having first done my research. With references of what could be sold, I went to the Dominican capital looking for merchandise. I would start in this new proposal. I then went to Mercedio Modelo, which is located in the center of the city and where you can find the most access to wholesale trade. The Haitian currency had more value than the money in my country. It was that moment that I began to look at how and what to invest. After an extensive research and long talks with my father, we decided to buy crackers. We acquired around 30 to 40 boxes. Each one contained 100 regular packages. With quite significant addition to the original price, a good profit could be obtained. It was marked as at the intended value. There was one person who recommended to me concerning making the transport to Haiti. There were trucks that were dedicated for this type of service. However, there was a lot of responsibility to be held concerning the journey, since police made many investigations in vehicles at certain checkpoints. The knowledgeable person I spoke to was with the name of Arziltio, a Haitian known to merchants. Arziltio was a medium height, thin, and his charisma had made him a likable person. He guided me to choose the merchandise and how to price things appropriately to make a profit. He was also the one who made contact with the truck driver and that would serve as transportation. These trucks were quite large and carried many Haitians and counterparts. We were dedicated to bringing all kinds of supplies to market in the neighboring country. I prepared myself very well for this role, and my father put all his faith in me. I knew that I would have excellent results. A new experience was about to start, with the visa in hand and placing all my boxes in the heavy truck, and then left for a new destination. We left the Mercado Modelo traveling for 6 hours until we reached the Haitian border. We had reviewed on the documents ways and then continued for another 3 hours. The people were suffering a profound economic crisis amid the social platform that aggravated the situation. After a long journey, we arrived in the city with great enthusiasm. I got out of the truck like the others, and each one going his separate way. Azultio waited for me to continue because he was my official guide in Haiti. He transferred me rather to a precarious hotel to stay. He explained that they would only charge me equivalent of $5 per night. Although that amount had been appreciable for the Haitian people, the truth was that the accommodations was not on the same level. Once I was settled, I prepared to visit the city. They had an explicit request of mine. It is the first time I saw the brother country and wanted to see if before starting my business adventure. The country was going through a difficult time. The population had not had any economical tranquility. The government had barely damaged the social economic system. I toured the city with Azulto and showed me the best known places in the center and surroundings, explaining in his way with much truthful historical knowledge the streets he invited me to visit. The atmosphere in general felt quite tense. Villagers recognized foreign people, especially because there was no trust between people there. We walked most of the day until we returned to the hotel room again. The next day, very early, we headed to the city market, where we found the so-called rebel scones, where we dedicated to looking for merchandise at an excellent price to resell it. Azulto had experience in this. Apart from that, he was well known by the merchants, and they asked him if merchandise he would offer. We hadn't even gotten the packages off the truck, and he had offers on our products. After a little consultation, we made a deal and achieved a reasonably quick and satisfactory transaction. We settled the business much earlier than expected, and I was thrilled. I stayed with my partner, and we met at night to celebrate the resounding success. We were on our way back. In the middle of the road, we get a mob of people who blocked the way. They prevented us from continuing, which was a surprise to me. I observed that the group of these people were cruelly punishing a man with blows. He was lying on the pavement, bleeding and unresponsive. They mistreated him, taking turns hurting him. Some of them were even women. I stood to one side to avoid being a horrendous witness to this ruthless attack. My companion and guide kept me observing the scene until after a few moments he approached me. I asked him what was the reason for such aggression. Then he explained to me that the man had indeed committed a crime. When I asked why the police were not being called, he replied, they happen to be doing that now. They would transfer the person to the barracks and then a little justice for the situation. They did not convince the resident that the criminal would have enough punishment. They attacked him in their own way and then handed him over just before making sure he had received one form of extreme punishment to pay for the crime he committed. I was astonished to see the man almost dead and bloody. I sat on the sidewalk for a long time while we continued our course. We agreed to go out that night with the desire to celebrate our commercial success. I was very eager to drink the original Rumbarak Court, which, according to history, was one of the most famous exports born in Haiti. On March 18, 1862, a French adventurer named Dupree Bancourt began making alcohol from sweet cane juice using double distillation technique. He settled in Port-au-Prince and became the precursor of this rum. In 1870, he married a Haitian, Nathalie Gardieri. He created this alcohol factory, and their alcohol was produced and sold with great success. Dupree Bancourt passed away without leaving descendants. At that moment, his wife Nathalie remained in charge of the business, taking on her brother, Rodolphe Gardy, to help. Over the years, Nathalie died, leaving poor Gardy, the brother, in command. Since Rodolphe was very old, at this time, Paul gave the factory a massive boost until he died in 1946. His son, Jean Gardy, was one who would spectacularly grow the business worldwide. Brancourt brand is now marketed in America and Europe. I walked with Azulto for 45 minutes before he asked me a couple of times if I wanted to get a taxi. Given my refusal, we continued on our way on foot. Through the streets, the atmosphere of poverty was breathed. Most of the roads were not covered with asphalt or decent homes. Instead, they were very homey, rustic materials and were not taken care of. On the contrary, the image that arose when entering the bar to be able to drink the long-awaited liquor of what was manifested. Despite people not having money, we found the place crowded. I thought with seeing so much poverty, there would be a minimum of people who could afford to purchase and drink alcohol. This turned out to be the opposite of my assumption. I listened to the rhythmic music very similar to the rhythm of Dominican bachata. However, its originated of French influence. Their peers of Cuba and the Dominican Republic created dances of music that included mixture of some Hispanic rhythms. Because I was a foreigner among most of the people inside the bar, naturally I attracted some looks curiosity. This seemed to be a good thing when I was offered a drink to some of them. They received them with pleasure. After drinking the rum for a long time and having pleasant conversation with my guide, I realized that there were many people at the windows observing the movement inside the bar. This reminded me of the people who did this in my country when there was a party or celebration, but they had no access. My grandfather told me that in 1965, in times of conflict in the Dominican Republic, American soldiers entered the bars to drink. It was a very comical way for them. People who had their particular way of looking through the windows became the party watchers. The American phrase that means to observe a party became more Dominican due to the difficulty of its pronunciation in the English language, deforming until it's left to term Paragoyo. Over time, it became a typical slang of the region, giving the name to a foolish person without wisdom or little experience. After drinking almost till midnight, we left to go home. Azuto was my guide, so he accompanied me everywhere. After walking about 15 minutes after leaving the bar, we noticed many streets with electric lighting. We were quite lighting and were quite gloomy. Insecurity dominated the environment. We stopped. He asked me to wait a moment. When he passed the corner, he indicated that suddenly he remembered that he had to see someone that he should not be long in returning. He went up to a kind of hotel with a rather twilight facade without any light to illuminate it. My first impression was that the motel was dedicated to prostitution. The moonlight and somewhat distant pole gave away this idea. A long alley of passageways went up to the entrance, and an old iron fence, severely battered and rusted by time, served as a door. Without fear of being accustomed to the environment, my guide entered after telling me that nothing would happen and I had nothing to fear. He patted me on the shoulder for encouragement and left me waiting for him to return. I began to feel the darkness of the night envelope my nerves. The atmosphere was not adequate or appropriate. Perhaps having drunk a little, I still had certain temperament. I had several minutes of impatience while Azuto still had not appeared. Insecurity was growing and taking over the moment I wanted to leave. I remember my country that although it has its problem, you always could feel that you were at home. The idea that I could take care of myself because my father was waiting for me, come back, gave me the courage to continue waiting. However, my concern for the situation created a feeling of emptiness. Suddenly, very violently, and silence, the calm was broken. Some guys rushed in, pushing the gate, hurrying, passing by me without paying attention to my presence. One of them stayed behind and closed the gate with a padlock, ensuring that nobody could get out of there. I did not know if I was in the middle of darkness. It was difficult for them to see me standing there. Perhaps it was merely the speed at which they entered that did not show interest in my presence. I was sure that my guide had something to do with what was happening with these men. I looked to one side of the building to see if there was any way out, in a tiny courtyard where no other way was noticeable. I figured the only way forward was to find the opportunity to climb the wall. About 10 minutes had passed and I heard something running towards the entrance. Agitated, almost without air, Azuto, my guide, repeated to me uncontrollably, "Run, run, don't ask questions, just run." Undoubtedly he saw me. He knew that I had not been in the wrong situation. The man was desperate and wanted to get out soon as possible. It was like I had made him aware that the gate and padlock were trapped. He stared at me with wide eyes pointing towards my back. When I turned around, I saw 3 guys with clubs in hand approaching me. Not only that, but there were 3 others with machetes right behind them. At that moment, as all moments that have been anguish, danger, and circumstances always related to my life, the voice appeared. I was never looking for it, but maybe I could say I felt its presence from the bottom of my heart. However, I never called out to listen or did it approach on its own. This time, without expectation, before the massive ambush that was coming upon us, the voice caused me to close my eyes when I heard it say, "Don't move, don't try to relax, everything will pass." Undoubtedly, in these moments of violence, it's not easy to stay still and listen to your inner voice. 2 of these men began to hit my guide brutally. Just receiving the first club, he fell to the ground without any objection. The third was realizing my presence, chose to hit me. I just covered my head and arms, taking the beating all over my body. If no one tried to defend himself, even by an autonomous adrenaline response, the men with machetes threatened to execute us. Although I was covered my head as the best as possible, my body was about to fall. Suddenly, so many blows in a row. There were very long moments, seeming practically endless. I did not even know why those guys were releasing their full fury upon us. I was praying for some bad action someone who was my partner in this commercial adventure had done. I endured the pain that overcame me and made me lose my breath. I thought that the end of my existence was coming and how my father was waiting for me all at once. I had to resist a little more. My guide was completely downcast, also covering himself. We're both waiting for a miracle. In the middle of the brawl and darkness, a police van appeared. It parked near the gate, observing what was happening. One of the troopers approached loudly, ordered them to stop, and they did. Very abusive, I can hear that they were talking in Creole and that the native language when other police officers approached from behind. The one of them opened the gate, removing the padlock that kept closed, so that 3 officers surrounded the scene. They sought to relieve Azuto, who needed help. 2 uniformed men slowly lifted him and led him to the police van while another approached. The commanding officer recognized that I was a foreigner, and I tried to speak in very broken Spanish. After starting this kind of interrogation, I told them that Azuto did not explain what he was doing in such a dangerous neighborhood. I did not have a criminal appearance. I immediately replied that I do not know anything about what happened, that I only accompanied the person who got hit. I was very sore. We were led to the police van, where there were 6 more policemen. Azuto was mistreated by refusal to go to the hospital, so we went straight to the police station. After we were very far from the start, the police command in fluent French advised me not to get involved in this type of situation again, or I could die. The neighborhood was dangerous, and without knowing the culture, much less the place, I shouldn't be risking my life like that. A few blocks after arriving, the police released us, and we did not arrive at the station. They told us to avoid this type of situation that could cost us dearly. Once we thanked the police for saving us, we walked towards the hotel about 30 minutes, very early in the morning. I asked Azuto what caused this experience where we almost lost our lives. Nervous and embarrassed, he explained that he had 2 children with Dominican women engaged in prostitution. This was hard for him to tolerate, so he wanted to remove her. That would be best for his children. Her manager realized that Azuto's complaint and reaction to her, and he called other criminals for help. The voice appeared again in this crucial moment, saving my life. Ever since the first time where it was presented itself, fear had never flourished within me. I was attentive and obedient to each of the instructions. I felt that those messages it gave from some internal force in my existence that I would get to know it. But more than knowing of it, learning how to understand it was vital. I did not hesitate for a single minute in believing in it. That voice had saved me over and over. To do this, I had to put myself before all religious teachings and devotion I had been taught. Through these situations with the voice, I realized that I should listen not to my understandings, but my being. Since I was little, I had the orientation towards a quite dominant Christian belief in every aspect. My parents had made everything in the family follow their doctrines that came from my grandparents. Perhaps they were led down the path of inheritance and they had continued building. The voice, because of fundamental as I developed as a human being. Each time I was becoming more aware that I would achieve what I was waiting for at the moment, to be able to interact with it. This objective, and then I completed after understanding that it was always there with me. It was just a matter of deciding and convincing me. The journey to Port-au-Prince had not ended. We had one more day to stay, so thinking about my room, the idea of looking for some other type of business came to mind. In those years, the economic depression affected the social economic sphere throughout the Dominican Republic. The shortage of food products was part of that. I decided to take flour back with me, as it seemed to take advantage of having it since flour was in high demand and very scarce. It was highly sought after in bakeries. That very early day, I waited for my guide and asked him to drive me to the market where I can get it. Transportation was very limited. Taxis hardly circulated. Public vehicles were in a complete state of deterioration, and there were unpaved streets. In general, most of the population moved on foot. After our tedious and hot tour, we arrived at the place. We walked for a long time looking for our best offer. Azulto was in charge of asking questions. The market offered infinite products where the costs compared to many countries were much more competitive. We investigated several stalls until I was convinced by a 200-pound bag of flour at a fair price. The merchant agreed to take it to the hotel where the truck would pick it up the day after. It was approximately noon when we finished shopping, so my guide suggested I walk to get to know this little area a little more. If I agreed, he could take me to a place where magic can be seen. He decided that he would not take me to a place of danger. He told me not to worry because where we would go was a safe place, totally out of the area that we had previously had that dangerous experience. So, trusting him, I accepted. I walked around for 45 minutes going through improvised places without any development. Most of the city showed those characteristics. We arrived at the neighborhood with somewhat rustic house where people were waiting to enter. My guide knew the manager and immediately ushered us in. I was waiting for what he described with words as a magic show, as a magician doing tricks for people to enjoy. However, as the minutes passed, I realized that this was black magic session or some religious ritual instead. Over the years, different religious interpretations have been known and transformed. One example is voodoo, which during the 17th century was created by influence of African slaves and their descendants and brought to Haiti. With time, other types of beliefs and customs were changed and idealized, which became rites and praises, each with different understanding. Although the Haitian population of 80% Catholic, there was a remaining majority were Protestant and animist belief. Some religious groups had voodoo as their form of faith. At that time, I did not believe in those interpretations. I had a solid Christian foundation, and I did not accept the rites practiced of any other nature. The only thing I was moving away from was the Christian faith via the inner voice. There were about 6 or 7 people in the room that were all there sitting in a meditation position. The rest were silent, very attentive to what was happening. There were chickens in line in the front of everybody. Each male and female held knives in their hands. After making a kind of prayer worship with their great devotion, they raised the birds as delivering them from heaven. The practice was for them a demonstration of religious differences. They proceeded to cut the chickens' throats and spray their blood on each of the believers, who were thoroughly soaking themselves in blood. It was a chilling scene, quite dreadful. For some reason, I could not resist observing. I asked my guide to leave this place. It was eerie cries of despair, weeping and anguish, and the pain to the side in the neighborhood room. After that tragic moment, someone came out of the place with screams were coming from. The people remained silent with their eyes closed and their heads rigid. The man who appeared was some sort of priest, wizard, sorcerer that led the ceremony. He advanced slowly, touching each people that remained in the meditation position. They were still covered in blood, the people having some seizure that led them more strangely on the ground, apparently possessed by something unknown. They remained this way for a long time. In there, for an instance of chaos and dismay, they had a conversation with my voice. Despite the very uncomfortable moment, I paused intentionally and asked the voice, "Is this true? Are they possessed?" The inner voice answered me, "Human beings have the power to turn their beliefs into reality. These human beings show their faith in the power that blood has. Their belief in the priest, magician, sorcerer, along with fear, envelops them in a position that reaches beyond the natural world. This allows them to enter a trance of their truth until they feel possessed by some external entity." I asked again, "Are they possessed? Does that exist?" The voice continued, "There is no energy that can do any kind of harm to a human being, but exposed to beliefs that lead them down the channel of truth because they feel it's true. Their beliefs make things a reality for them. The trance produced a mixture of fear born through the ceremony, growing in their minds and leading them to act strangely and hallucinate. It was that way because they convinced it was real." I was quite uneasy, very moved by it. This was a conversation with answers that perhaps I did not find before. It was the first time that I unconsciously dared to ask without meditation. I was surprised that I got such a concrete and valid answers. After a few minutes, I asked my guide again to leave that place. We arrived at the hotel. Azuto said goodbye, and I knew we should leave early the next day. I went up to my room where I stayed very calm, reading a book until I fell asleep. In the morning, my guide appeared earlier than planned. He told me that we could do another business transaction that day that would benefit us a little bit more. If we took another product to the Dominican Republic, we would double the amount we have already earned. I replied that I was delighted with what we had obtained and that I did not want or need to do any other business. With the merchandise sold, I made profits. By selling flour, a new stage would begin to change. I was satisfied with everything and was not interested in making another investment. On the top of that, I was definitely not interested if it would cause me to engage in something illegal. Azuto was a very unique person. I had come to know him through references. Although he was positively helping me, he had also caused me a couple of uncomfortable situations that we managed to overcome. We were already not in the environments, but I had to wait with caution until he arrived back. Of course, as expected, Azuto left to get the new item to sell, completely ignoring my words and lack of consent. He decided to do another business transaction with some of his friends, which soon to become another problem. That afternoon, the truck that would take us back to pick me up agreed. My guide was waiting for me at the market where he had sacks of flowers that he had acquired to bring to my country. With my luggage on board, I had to carry my merchandise. I was surprised when I observed two men place the bag in front of the driver's seat. I approached him and asked him why the change of placement for this item, warning him that I did not want any problem that could harm me. I was only carrying the merchandise of legal status, so nothing needed to be switched around or placed in a certain way. Azuto replied that there was no problem and he would talk about it upon our arrival. Still, I did not believe him and took this as a bad omen. If we were telling the truth, it's not the whole truth. We were on the road for about 4 or 5 hours, reached the border between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. There we found a border checkpoint, Haitian soldiers. We stopped as if we were required by law. There were around 30 people in the truck we had. We got out and we were waiting for our turn to be checked. The military oversaw the heavy vehicle. One of them went up to the vehicle's front. He never raised the driver's seat where the merchandise Azuto had placed. We paused the receptive checkpoint and without any other inconveniences, we continued. We had crossed the border and we're the Dominican territory now. There is still immigration review at the time with authorities from my country. Realizing that we were very close to arriving, Azuto told me the truth about the merchandise he had loaded in the truck. It was quite equivalent to that of a gangster movie, but instead we were living it in a real way. Without my agreement on the matter, my guide, my criminal, had cut the flour sack to hide firearms in it. The constant revolution and different calibers, we were now mixed not only with the merchandise, but that would impact my life and my future. Arms trafficking from Haiti to the Dominican Republic was a severe crime. I never knew what was in the flour bag that Azuto put in the front seat. I assumed it was flour and I was clueless of why he moved the bag from the other merchandise. I was only made aware what I would be explained to later. Understanding that the weapons would be discovered by the military and police, my guide, without looking me in the eye, explained, "Hopefully they won't find it." Listening to him, I allowed to see my innocence in the matter. "What do you mean when you say that?" With great nervousness, he began to explain what had happened. It was difficult for me to keep my composure, but we were in the middle of the road. I had to take a deep breath when I finished listening to be able to think about and be able to get out of this mess, of which I was innocently involved. They forced me to put something inside my jacket. I couldn't say no because those who ordered it were the traffickers themselves. And if they force you to do something and you don't obey, it can be very badly for you. In those moments, if I was told of what was inside the firearms, we were going to leave the bag. Then my life and mine would be in danger. They forced me. I had no other choice. That's why I told you that I hope they don't find it. Certainly in any case like this, it was difficult to stay calm. I did not find any solution that could free me at this moment. It was particularly impossible to abandon everything. I could not leave the time, the money, and the risk I had already accepted. I came to an understanding at the moment that my guide had gone through with a threat of that nature. I even crossed my mind to thank him for not putting my life at risk. I saw that he decided in the best way given the lack of options. However, I later found out his story was false. The truck was approaching Pradale Ness, a municipality in the Dominican Republic. This place was located in the southwest part of the country bordering Haiti. We were about to get the real test. Honestly, my nerves played a trick on me. It was then I had again resorted to the voice that already made a different appearance from those that happened since my childhood. Now the voice was interactive and would respond to my request. As we got closer to the immigration post, I began to feel anxieties and anguish that I could not master. I knew that we were approaching the outcome that could cause me to go to jail again. In the middle of all this pressure that I had in my mind, I decided to have an internal conversation to ask the voice about it. This time, the voice referred to itself as more than one. "What do I do now?" the voice answered me. "We have told you that nothing will happen. You must not fear." It was strange to decipher why the voice said that, but I continued. "But how can I not fear if they are going to check the truck and what's inside the bag is going to be discovered? Even if they check the truck entirely, their eyes are going to see absolutely nothing. Don't worry." I was hopeful and still very cautious, even though I trusted what the voice had told me. I was not suspicious of any of its words. Instead, that I was reassured with the understanding that some kind of calm and confidence that had been building within me since the first time the voice spoke. The interactions with the voice were becoming more comfortable as they ceased to feel foreign. We reached the Pedernales checkpoint. The truck stopped, and the military immediately approached out of the corresponding work. They cordially invited all the passengers to get off. People might have bought merchandise to negotiate with Dominican Republic. The police warning was a permanent alert in each border location. Hence, the exhaustive search was conducted for each vehicle that crossed its lines. We were not an exception. The truckers managed to hide the contraband as best as possible. They hid things in secret places where police eyes did not reach. After a few moments, the police began to take out boxes and other items considered as contrabands. Not one could do anything about it now. Azudo was watching me with an expression that showed his guilt. I waited beside him quietly, serene, a bit of tempted nerves, with the sensitive knowledge that at any moment an intense search would come forward. They would make their way to the driver's cabin, under the seat where the bag of supposed flour was. Two uniformed men went forward, one on each side. They opened the doors of the truck, checked the entire area. One of them told the partner, "Lift the seat." They were hiding merchandise in secret compartments, as was well known. Of course, the bag was discovered. At that moment, Azudo turned to avoid me. My consequences were about to unfold. However, I kept calm and confident because the interaction I had had with the voice. I knew that nothing was going to happen. The doors of the truck remained open. We were very close to manage to see if the uniformed men doing their job. This is when one of them explained. There is a bag here. It seems to be drugs." His partner immediately called the officer over, and he approached to make sure. He saw the bag and addressed the driver, saying, "Sir, this bag looks like drugs. You know what that means, right?" The very nervously man quickly pointed to me in response, "I don't know anything. The merchandise belongs to these young men." Despite having managed to remain very calm, those seconds of mistrust were gravitating again to ask the voice. I feel fear again. I cannot help it. What is going to happen now? They already found the bag. I don't know what to do. We told you that nothing is going to happen. And so it will be. Be calm. Everything will be fine. Do not fear. I took a few steps forward and explained to the officer, "Sir, it's just a sack of flour that I bought in Haiti due to the scarcity in our country. It's not what you think." Of course, my explanation was useless. The officer carried the bayonet, a sharp-pointed blade placed on the muzzle of a rifle, over to the flour bag, making holes in it, checking what it was. I closed my eyes and hoped that nothing was discovered. The officer asked the two subordinates to close the door and stay away from the area. We just have to wait confidently for a good outcome. After several minutes, they got out of the truck. They seemed to be annoyed by the dust that was sprouting a significant proportion. "That is flour." The boy did not lie. Azuto was very incredulous of what he had experienced. He looked at me, eager to say something to me, happiness showing on his face. However, the expression in my eyes made him understand that he should say anything at all. The fear, the anguish, the sweat that was flowing down his body had ceased. My guide was surprised as the driver of what had happened. After a half hour, they permitted us to continue on our journey. 5 or 6 hours later, after crossing, we arrived in Santo Domingo at the Mercado Modelo. We were finally arrived at our destination. I left the bag of flour in storage to pick it up the next day. It was approximately 6 in the afternoon, just as it seemed, that we were recovering from the most recent traumatic experience. Things changed yet again. The sun was beginning to fall, and I talked to my guide near the truck. We unloaded the bag, having calmed down. Azuto gave me other alternatives to continue doing business with him, not forgetting that his people would come for his weapons first thing. Suddenly, 2 men of thick build approached us. They had a revolver in their hand. I thought for a moment they were the ones who had come for the weapons, but I was wrong. They identified themselves as undercover police, handcuffed us, and we were arrested on the spot. Azuto was very passive. Without saying a single word, he looked down and didn't resist arrest. Very respectfully, I headed towards the police. He waited for the van to take us to the nearest station, which would bring me another great surprise. My guide, the person recommended to me to make this commercial journey for the first time, turned out to be an international criminal. Despite having been well known for his character and having done all kinds of business, I discovered that Azuto had warrants out for his arrest in Haiti, and he was prosecuted for countless Dominican crimes. We were passing by everybody, handcuffed in the back of the police vehicle, when people from the rooftop and windows and stairs started shouting, "Release him, he's Haitian, set him free." Again, I was an innocent person. The shame and embarrassment of living with this outrageous scene brought to mind all the previous moments I spent in prison. I had lived in poverty most of my life, although I experienced a constant shortage of food and clothing. I never had sought crime of a situation or acquiring more. I always fought and honestly for what I gained. In the middle of the booming at the arrest, the detective was in our custody, tried to react, so So in the calm voice, I said, "Don't do anything. It's not worth it. You're just doing your job." He stared at me very curiously, surprised at my words upon hearing that handcuffed the man who was taken to prison was taking his side. When we arrived at the police station, there was all ecstatic about the capture of Azuto. Overjoyed personnel were saying, "Look who we have here, the popular Azuto. We have been looking for you for a long time. You finally fell in our lap." Until those moments, I did not know why I was detained. Somehow I felt guilty for the merchandise, even though it was not my fault. However, I realized the fact of simply being by his side was enough reason to be arrested. Still, no one told me why I had been arrested. Also, during almost arriving at the cell, and before removing the handcuffs, the detective told me, "Don't worry. The captain comes, I will tell him to release you. I know that you're innocent. Unfortunately, you were in the right place at the wrong time with the wrong man. Right now, we cannot set you free." He ushered me into a small cell crowded with people along my Haitian companion. Many hours had passed since our arrest. The room and the cell was about 10 by 15 feet with approximately 20 to 30 people in it. It was almost impossible to breathe and was an extremely hostile and nauseating environment. As in every passage of life that seemed negative, I looked for the voice again so that in this terrible moment would help me. "I would like to hear from you and tell you I must do now is to get out of this place." Without pause, the voice answered me. "Just tell them you have asthma. It's almost impossible to breathe, and that you fear a drop in your health." From our position, we could not see the desk of one of the subordinates who made the reports. I began to shout with him with a rather high-pitched voice, repeating my state of health was not good. I got him to pay attention to me and send me one of the custodians over to the cell. "I suffer from asthma, and this environment, I will have an attack. I do not feel well, sir." After consulting with his superior, he turned back and took me to the side of the desk. He gave me a seat, and I stayed there, although still handcuffed, but out of the unbearable environment. The officer asked me again, and I gave him the same answer. I kept calm, hoping to be free as soon as possible. The captain in the carriage arrived after a long wait. The other jail personnel began with the story that seemed to be the news of the day. "Officer, we caught the famous Azuto." It was the first thing he informed me, and the officer approaches the others, asking questions for more details about the good news. Suddenly, he realized I was sitting in the chair handcuffed. He watched me, wondering who I was, and began to say, "This man who's sitting here." The policeman at the desk replied, the detainee was not feeling well. "He has asthma. This is not a hospital. If one is captured here, he must stay inside the cell." It was a precise moment the detective had arrested me intervenes. "Captain, this boy is innocent. He was close to Azuto at the time of the capture in the market. The boy is a merchant. He stopped him with precaution. However, he has nothing to do with it. We were observing his every moment, and he unpacked the merchandise. It was the moment that Azuto approached him to serve as a translator and stopped the two to avoid any setback." The captain asked the detective a couple of times if he was sure of his words, his response always being positive toward me. "It's okay. Remove his handcuffs and let him go." Then addressing me, "And stop talking to dangerous criminals," The man is wanted internationally because he has committed many crimes. After thanking him, I went home. The next day I woke up very early, and I had not been easy to fall asleep that night, but I had to leave to get the merchandise stored in the model market warehouse. Still affected of what I had experienced the previous day, I arrived at the place looking for the sack of flour. The manager very kindly received me and took me to search for it. I mistrusted the situation any time there were weapons present. I always felt like I could die. With the mafia, anything could happen. Many negative thoughts reached out to me of the state I was in front of my most recent experience. Because of the fear I had encountered in my life, I always was repeating it in a cycle over and over. I walked lightly until a man pointed out the place that I longed for merchandise. I got closer to observe that the bag was completely open. I feared my merchandise was gone. I slowly and carefully took my hands to the edge as thousands of thoughts crossed my mind. Finally, I could verify that those characters who worked with Azuto had taken my merchandise, but had taken their merchandise, but had left mine. With more tranquility, I raised my sack of flour and headed home. My breathing had returned to normal, and I was sure that the night I would sleep in peace. I headed home in a taxi.